Most people enter the market thinking success comes from being smart. They believe if they read enough books, follow enough charts, or listen to enough opinions, money will eventually come. I once believed something similar. But the market has a strange way of teaching a man lessons he never asked to learn. It does not reward hope, excitement, or impatience. It rewards discipline, and even then, only after it has tested you in ways you never expected. I have seen men lose fortunes because they could not control themselves, and I have watched ordinary men succeed because they finally learned what truly matters. Success in trading is not about avoiding pain. Pain is part of the price. The real question is whether you are willing to learn from it. Because every successful trader, sooner or later, is forced to face a few brutal lessons that change the way they think forever. Forever is a long time, especially in the market. A man may think he understands himself today, only to discover tomorrow that fear can change his decisions faster than reason ever could. I learned that lesson in a way I never expected. There were times when I stood on top of the world, believing I had finally understood the game. Money came quickly, confidence grew, and I started believing I had become stronger than my mistakes. But the market has a quiet way of humbling anyone who grows too certain. I remember moments when I watched fortunes disappear faster than they were built, not because opportunity vanished, but because I stopped listening to the warnings that were right in front of me. Success can be dangerous when it makes a man careless. After enough wins, you begin to trust your feelings more than your judgment. You stop waiting. You stop questioning yourself. You convince yourself that because you were right yesterday, you must surely be right again tomorrow. That way of thinking cost me more than money. It cost me peace. There is something deeply painful about sitting alone with your own mistakes, knowing no one forced your hand, no enemy caused the loss, no bad luck can take all the blame. Sometimes, the hardest truth a trader must accept is that he becomes his own greatest problem. There were nights when I replayed every decision in my mind, asking myself where things started to go wrong. It was never one giant mistake. Rarely does ruin arrive all at once. Instead, it comes quietly. One careless decision becomes another. One moment of impatience leads to another risk that never should have been taken. By the time a man realizes he has drifted too far, he is already fighting to recover what should never have been lost. Yet, strange as it sounds, those failures taught me more than success ever could. Winning feels good, but it rarely forces a man to examine himself. Loss does. Loss sits beside you like an unwelcome teacher, asking questions you cannot avoid. Why were you impatient? Why did you ignore doubt? Why did you risk more than you should have? Those are difficult questions, but they matter. Over time, I stopped seeing mistakes as something to hide from. I began to see them as lessons waiting to be understood. Pride became expensive, and patience became valuable. I learned that confidence means little if it is not guided by discipline. A man who cannot control himself will eventually lose, no matter how clever he may be. The truth is, every trader carries a story filled with disappointment, regret, and moments they wish they could undo. I certainly did, but those moments changed me. They forced me to grow wiser, slower in my decisions, and more honest with myself, and that honesty became worth more than any quick success I had ever chased. More than any quick success I had ever chased. Honesty with myself became something I could no longer ignore. Once a man sees his own mistakes clearly, he starts understanding a difficult truth about the market. It owes him nothing. Not patience, not rewards, and certainly not success simply because he wants it badly enough. This was the first hard lesson I had to accept, and it took me far too long to understand. There was a time when I believed effort alone deserved results. If I studied enough, watched enough movement, and trusted my instincts, surely the market would eventually move in my favor. But wanting something does not make it happen. The market does not care about your hopes or your plans. It moves in its own direction, with no concern for how badly you wish to be right. I remember days when I entered trades simply because I felt restless. Waiting felt uncomfortable. I mistook action for progress. Doing something felt better than doing nothing, even when deep down I knew the moment was not right. That impatience quietly became expensive. Small mistakes turned into larger ones because I convinced myself things would improve if I only held on a little longer. What I failed to understand at the time was that waiting is often the hardest part of success. Most people believe successful traders are constantly making moves, constantly chasing opportunities. But many times, success comes from sitting still. It comes from knowing when not to act. That kind of patience feels uncomfortable because it asks a man to trust time instead of emotion. I learned this lesson after enough painful reminders. There were moments when everything inside me wanted to jump in, to force results, to recover faster, to prove I had not made a mistake. Yet every time I acted from frustration or urgency, things only became worse. The market has a way of punishing desperation. It teaches patience by making impatience costly. Slowly, I began changing the way I looked at decisions. Instead of asking myself how quickly I could win, I started asking whether the moment truly deserved action. Was I being calm, or was I simply chasing something because I feared missing out? That single question saved me from many mistakes. There is great strength in restraint, though most people do not notice it. Anyone can act when emotions are high. Anyone can follow excitement. But staying patient when others rush ahead takes a different kind of discipline. It means accepting that opportunities will come again. It means understanding that missing one moment is far better than forcing the wrong one. Many people lose not because they lack intelligence, but because they cannot sit quietly with uncertainty. They grow impatient, and impatience pushes them toward poor decisions. I learned that success is often less about finding the perfect moment and more about avoiding the wrong ones. The market never promised fairness, and expecting it to behave the way you want only creates disappointment. Once I accepted that truth, something changed inside me. I stopped trying to control outcomes and started focusing on controlling myself. And strangely enough, that is when better decisions finally began to appear. Better decisions finally began to appear, but that did not mean the struggle disappeared. In many ways, it only changed shape. You begin to think you have learned enough, that you finally understand what separates success from failure, and then something unexpected happens. A mistake returns, not because you forgot what to do, but because emotions have a quiet way of speaking louder than reason. This is where many traders begin to destroy themselves without even realizing it. They stop following what they know and start following what they feel. Fear enters quietly, greed follows close behind, and before long, decisions are no longer being made with patience, but with emotion. A man tells himself he is being hopeful, when in truth he is simply refusing to accept reality. I learned this in painful ways. There were moments when I held on to losing positions longer than I should have, not because the signs were good, but because I wanted them to be good. I convinced myself things would turn around if I only waited a little longer. Hope became a dangerous companion. It whispered comforting lies at the exact moment honesty was needed most. What makes this difficult is that emotions often disguise themselves as confidence. A man may believe he is staying strong when he is actually avoiding the truth. He says he believes in himself, but deep inside, fear of being wrong keeps him trapped. No one likes admitting mistakes. Pride has a strange way of protecting bad decisions long after they should have been abandoned. The market has little patience for pride. It does not reward stubbornness simply because someone refuses to admit defeat. If anything, it punishes it. I learned that one of the hardest things a person can do is accept being wrong quickly. Yet the sooner I learned to let go of bad decisions, the less damage they caused. There came a moment when I had to ask myself an uncomfortable question. Was I following a clear plan, or was I simply reacting to emotions? That question changed the way I looked at everything. It forced honesty, and honesty is not always pleasant. Sometimes it reveals that fear has been making decisions for you without permission. I began noticing how often people mistake hope for strategy. They stay in situations because they want things to improve, not because there is a good reason to believe they will. Wanting something badly can cloud judgment. It creates stories in the mind that feel comforting even when reality says otherwise. The truth is, emotions are strongest when things feel uncertain. That is exactly when patience matters most. Not blind patience that ignores reality, but calm patience rooted in honesty. The kind that allows a person to step back, think clearly, and admit when something no longer makes sense. Success began to feel different once I understood this. It stopped being about proving myself right. It became about staying clear headed when emotions tried to pull me away from reason. Because in the end, a person rarely loses simply from one bad moment. More often, they lose because they allowed emotions to quietly take control while convincing themselves they were still thinking clearly. Thinking clearly is harder than most people imagine, especially when money is involved. Even after learning painful lessons, there comes a moment when a trader faces another difficult truth. Success is not built in one great decision. It is built in small moments of discipline repeated again and again. Most people search for the perfect trade, the perfect opportunity, the one moment that changes everything. I used to think that way myself. But over time, I learned that lasting success rarely arrives all at once. There were periods in my life when I believed speed would solve my problems. If I lost money, I wanted to recover quickly. If I missed an opportunity, I rushed to find another. Everything felt urgent. But urgency has a dangerous way of making a man careless. It pushes him toward choices made out of pressure rather than patience. And pressure almost always clouds judgment. One of the hardest lessons I learned was understanding that not every opportunity deserves attention. Some moments look exciting simply because emotions are high, noise surrounds them, people speak with certainty, excitement spreads quickly, and suddenly it feels impossible to stay calm. Yet many of the worst decisions begin exactly there. In moments where emotion becomes louder than reason, I started realizing something simple but powerful. The people who survive longest are not always the smartest. They are often the most patient. They understand that success does not come from chasing every possibility. Sometimes, wisdom means walking away. Sometimes, the strongest choice is waiting quietly while everyone else rushes ahead. This was not easy for me to accept. Waiting can feel uncomfortable. It can even feel like weakness. A man begins to wonder if he is missing something important. Doubt creeps into the mind. Others appear confident, opportunities seem endless, and staying still suddenly feels foolish. But I learned that chasing everything often leads to catching nothing. Over time, I stopped measuring success by quick results. Instead, I began paying attention to consistency. Was I staying disciplined? Was I making decisions with patience? Was I protecting myself from unnecessary mistakes? Those questions mattered more than any single victory. I also learned something many people avoid admitting. Losing is part of the journey. No one succeeds all the time. Anyone who promises certainty is either mistaken or dishonest. What matters is not avoiding every mistake, but learning how to recover without losing yourself in frustration. A calm mind after disappointment becomes far more valuable than excitement during success. There is a quiet strength that comes from accepting limits. You stop trying to control everything. You stop forcing results. Instead, you begin trusting patience and discipline to guide your actions. Ironically, the less desperate you become for immediate success, the closer success often feels. As years passed, I noticed that many people made the same mistake again and again. They searched outside themselves for answers when the real battle had always been within. Fear, impatience, pride, and desperation quietly shaped their decisions without them noticing. And perhaps the hardest lesson of all is this: success does not belong to the person who wants it most. It belongs to the one who stays steady long enough to grow wiser even when the journey feels slow, uncertain, and at times painfully difficult. Painfully difficult moments have a way of changing a person. They strip away confidence that was built too quickly and force a man to see himself more honestly. Looking back, I have often thought about how different my life might have been if I had understood these lessons earlier. Perhaps I would have avoided certain mistakes. Perhaps I would have held on to more money. But wisdom rarely arrives before struggle. Most lessons only make sense after life has already demanded the price. What I eventually came to understand is that success is not reserved for the fastest thinker or the boldest person in the room. In fact, many who move too quickly often lose themselves chasing certainty that does not exist. Real progress comes quietly. It grows through patience, through discipline, and through the ability to stay calm when confusion surrounds you. Many people enter the market hoping to change their lives overnight. They imagine freedom arriving quickly, as though one good moment will erase years of frustration. I understand that feeling. I once believed success would finally bring peace, confidence, and certainty. Yet what surprised me most was learning that peace never came from money alone. It came from understanding myself. A man who cannot control fear will struggle. A man who cannot control pride will struggle even more. And a man who believes success means never failing will spend much of his life disappointed. Failure is not always proof that you are lost. Sometimes it is proof that you are learning. The important thing is what happens after disappointment arrives. Do you become bitter, careless, and impatient? Or do you pause long enough to understand what the experience was trying to teach you? I have seen people walk away after difficult losses, convinced they simply were not meant for success. Yet often, they gave up just before growth had a chance to appear. Growth rarely feels rewarding in the moment. More often, it feels uncomfortable. It asks patience from people who want quick answers. It asks humility from people who would rather protect their pride. If there is one thing I would want every trader to understand, it is this: the market will test you in ways you never expect. Not only your decisions, but your patience, your honesty, and your emotions. At times, it will tempt you into acting too quickly. Other times, it will challenge your confidence. And there will be moments when you question whether the effort is even worth it. But every difficult season carries a lesson hidden inside it. The people who eventually succeed are often the ones who refuse to stop learning. They become calmer after mistakes, wiser after disappointment, more patient after struggle. They stop searching for shortcuts and begin respecting the process, even when it feels slow. In the end, success is not built through perfect decisions. It grows through understanding, patience, and the willingness to keep learning from hard experiences. The market will continue doing what it has always done. The only thing you can truly shape is the person you become while facing it. And perhaps that becomes the greatest reward of all, not simply earning money, but becoming stronger, wiser, and more disciplined than the person you once were.